and welcome to my channel. It's super to have you join me here today. Today I'm going to talk with you about the planning for my autumn wardrobe and doing it in the way of a recreate the look. Many of the clothes that I make, patterns I'm drawn to, and the patterns that I design in Pattern Cut, as you know, are vintage inspired, and most of my inspiration comes from watching period films, recreations, period dramas from vintage magazines, and vintage patterns. That's where I go to source my style looks. About 2 or 3 years ago, I did Insta lives. I wonder if it might have even been during COVID, but I did Insta lives on recreate the look from period dramas with Charlotta of Charlotta's Pattern Cutting School. And they were so interesting. What we would do is we'd focus on one of the dramas, and I think we did Rebecca, The Durrells and The Pursuit of Love, and then something happened, we didn't carry on following the project through. But it was really interesting because I would source patterns that you could recreate the look from these dramas or films, and Charlotta would show how you could pattern cut certain looks. You know, we decided on some key looks, and they were a lot of fun. And I was thinking about bringing them back, but through my YouTube channel. I did say to you I was going to be doing that very soon. And the first one that I want to do is based on Rebecca. We've got the original Hitchcock version, which is a film I utterly love. Watched it so much through my childhood. I was so lucky to be able to study the novel on my degree and write about it. I think I focused more on Mrs. Danvers and her relationship with Rebecca on my degree. And then there's been so many versions since. I know there's one in the 70s, I can't remember who the main character, I think it might have been Amelia Fox's mum, Joanna, I can't remember her surname, who played the one in the 70s. And then Amelia Fox and Charles Dance, which is probably the 90s. And then we have the more recent one, the Ben Wheatley version with Lily James and Arnie Hammer. And Julian was the costume designer, and it's that one that I'm going to be looking at for recreate the look. In the novel and both of the films, clothes are absolutely central. They were central to Maurier for creating her themes and characterization, and Hitchcock, primarily led by Selznick as producer and the holder of the money, and then Ben Wheatley with Julian, they carry on using that central theme of clothes to show characterization and theme. Clothes, they reveal so much about a character, their arc, you know, from one type of identity to another, you know, how they progress and change, what clothes reveal about a person, whether they actually want them revealed about themselves, and what clothes can reveal about the dead figure of Rebecca. You know, what the unnamed narrator, who is the second Mrs. De Winter, believes Rebecca to have been, what Danvers, her housekeeper, who has been with Rebecca or was with Rebecca from childhood, her relationship to the clothes, as if they're still the living embodiment of Rebecca the figure. So clothes are incredibly central from the writer through to how they've been interpreted in film. And this novel is set in the 30s, the mid to late 30s, great style era. And in Julian Day's representation of the clothes, he tried to create a look that was as much suitable for a contemporary wardrobe as a vintage inspired. So we can all draw inspiration from these looks, and I've picked some really good ones. I'm really pleased with what I found. Before we go on to share the patterns with you, just wanted to give you a little bit of background on Rebecca the novel and the costume designers, because this is really interesting and useful to understanding the looks and how they're recreated. Daphne du Maurier, she wrote Rebecca while she was living in Alexandria in Egypt. It was a posting with her husband Frederick, and the novel was then published in 1938. And she was actually quite a shy, quiet person. She preferred living in Cornwall at her beloved Manderley, and she loved to walk, sail and write, not be part of the sort of expat social circle. Her husband had previously been engaged to a lady called Jan Ricardo, and then she called it off. And du Maurier became fixated on this fact. She read the letters between them and she saw the large flourishing R, and that became Rebecca in her mind. You know, it starts the seeds of thought for her novel. And the novel, after she wrote it, was referred to as a romance or a gothic romance, and that greatly annoyed du Maurier. She referred to it as a study in jealousy, and I assume her jealousy of Jan Ricardo. And then you delve into the novel and you have the jealousy of the second Mrs. de Winter, jealous of the relationship between Maxim and what she assumes the marriage was between him and Rebecca, his dead wife. Du Maurier in many ways embodies both the narrator and Rebecca in her personality and the way she chose to dress. She was shy yet confident, and she was also very uncompromising. The living obedient second Mrs. de Winter versus rebellious Rebecca are both du Maurier, and she wasn't drawn to glamour. She preferred to wear trousers and suits, and she wanted to sail and work and live her life in clothes that allowed her to do that in Cornwall. And Rebecca also sails and she rides horses. She's a glamorous woman, we're told, but she also loved that outdoor life, and she wore trousers. There's a reference in the novel to her putting her hands in the pockets of her trousers. As we know, trousers during the 30s weren't worn by many women. It would have been the upper classes that would have worn them, either as resort wear or at home, but it wasn't a common sight, and you would not have seen your average woman on the high street wearing a pair of trousers. The novel's a cyclical tale. It begins at the end of the story with a dream. It begins with a famous line, "Last night I dreamt I was at Manderley again," and it ends with the fire at Manderley, which precedes the beginning of the novel. And it's told through the viewpoint of the unnamed narrator who marries Maxim de Winter. And she's a timid, self-doubting young woman who's working as a lady's companion in the south of France when they meet. And they marry really quickly, and then they go back to England to his house Manderley. And Rebecca, the first Mrs. de Winter, dominates the whole story. And there are many comparisons between Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca and Jane Eyre and the Bluebird story, and the Bluebeard, I can't say it, and the Bluebeard story, as early examples of intertextuality where one text borrows from the storyline of another. So they mirror each other. We've got ghost-like characters, a repressive mansion, an older troubled man who hides a secret, and they end in a fire. So very, very similar. You'll recognise if you've read Jane Eyre as well that they almost parallel one another. When they return to Manderley, Mrs. Danvers, the housekeeper, is there. She adored Rebecca. She keeps her character alive. She appears to mock and scorn and make the unnamed narrator's life hell, and makes her nervousness and her anxiety rise until we have the final denouement at the end of the novel. And if you've not read it, I'm not going to say any more. The novel, du Maurier draws our attention to the relationship between clothes and also the body of the person who's wearing them. When we first meet the unnamed narrator, she's rather poor. She's in sort of worn out sort of suits. They're often borrowed. She looks rather schoolgirlish and out of place amongst the glamorous Riviera set. And she wants to be more glamorous and worldly. And as she starts to go out with Maxim, she becomes freer in her dress. I mean, I do wonder where she suddenly found this fabulous wardrobe. We have to let that go. But I'm going to look at some of the Riviera clothes before we move on to the later, because we're looking at autumn looks more, aren't we? Throughout the novel, the unnamed narrator is constantly reminded of Rebecca's charm and her glamour, and it totally feeds her sense of inadequacy. In chapter 14, she goes into Rebecca's bedroom, which has been maintained almost like a shrine by Mrs. Danvers, and you can tell she's been in there almost daily polishing it. It's her alone that takes control of this room, not letting anyone else in there. But the unnamed narrator goes in, is found by Mrs. Danvers, and it's a rather creepy scene within the Hitchcock and the modern day version, where clothes are used to describe Rebecca's physical body, and they reveal this almost obsessive intimacy from Mrs. Danvers when she places her hand under the lingerie to show her hand through the transparent fabric. And Rebecca's green coat is also not in this room, but you know, it's still hanging, and she goes to put that on outside and finds her handkerchief with the R emblazoned, you know, embroidered on it. So Rebecca's there as a constant reminder to her. Now in the Hitchcock version, David O. Selznick had just produced Gone with the Wind, and he was balancing huge finances. You know, it was a blockbuster of a film and used up a lot of money. So to save money on Rebecca, he tells them that there will be no costume designer and they're going to have to get the costumes from stock, whatever they can find from stock. So even though much of the narrative is supported by clothes and their symbolism, there aren't any costumes created. But ironically, he did pay for a wardrobe to be created for promotional purposes only. The wardrobe created was all of the dead Rebecca's clothes that wouldn't be seen in the film. But he did have one garment that was in the film, and it was Rebecca's dressing gown and a midnight blue negligee, and the dressing gown was embossed with a letter R. And apparently after filming, Selznick loved it so much that he gave it to his wife for Christmas. That he used some of these clothes in the film to represent someone who's not in the film, i.e. Rebecca. Hitchcock called this picturizing. That was a technique that he called, you know, I suppose us as the audience would picturize. Imagine this character through their clothes, not through their physical entity. Now, in the most recent film version, I find the costumes fascinating. Julian Day has put so much thought into them, how they represent a character and the themes, and they tell the story of Rebecca. And the film opens with the likeness of clothes worn in the Riviera to the mid-1930s heavy tweeds and knitwear that was common in England, you know, in these very cold country homes. Julian Day said he wanted clothes that were period correct, but ones that a modern audience could relate to, they could understand and they'd want to wear. Now, if we look at the first costume in the Riviera scene, the first outfit that Lily James, as the unnamed narrator, wears, she's wearing a glorious blouse. It's not in a Liberty cotton, it's a fabric I've seen in a lot of fabric shops and online, but I think it might be a copy of a Liberty, but for me, a Liberty cotton would be perfect for this. And it's paired with lovely blue trousers, like sailor pants of the time, of which I have quite a few pairs. The blouse, it's got a few buttons, it ties at the neck, and then it's got, rather than a jabot, which you know is a loose separate part, it's got the frills that look like a jabot either side, and you know, it fits at the waist, and then it's got these lovely slim fitting over the hips wide leg trousers. You can't see the button front, but I'm assuming that's what they're emulating. Interesting in this scene, you see her with the pink at the top and the blue, and Julian Day had created all her costumes so she mirrors the surroundings. So the pink of the buildings behind her, all these Mediterranean houses and the blue of the sea, it's about how she always blends into the scenery. It's to show how her character isn't as forceful and coming as forward as the confident, exuberant, enigmatic Rebecca. So all the colours, and by the time she gets to England, she starts to blend into the surroundings even more. Her colours become more muted. But in this Riviera outfit, she looks absolutely stunning. To recreate this outfit, as I said, I would use a Liberty cotton for the blouse that I found. Our Wearing History Nanette blouse, which I think would be absolutely perfect for it. But an even closer match is from My Vintage Wish 6979, and I will put links to these patterns below in the box for you. But I think both of these blouses would perfectly recreate the blouse from this style, and then could be worn in the winter and autumn, you know, with warm knits over top, so you can layer it and wear a vest underneath if you're really chilly. So it could move from all the seasons, as we do with a lot of our clothes. For the trousers, Wearing History's smooth sailing trousers, which have like a elasticated waist, they're wide leg trouser, they would be perfect to recreate this look. And you could make them in like a navy twill or a lovely dark denim, a lightweight denim. This debut also has a fabulous pair which button down the side, which will be useful for another look that I'm looking at, and that's 3101B for that pattern. When the unnamed narrator and Maxim first arrive back at Manderley with all the staff out to meet them, she's wearing this amazing coat. It's almost like a 30s style trench coat, and how it folds over at the front, and I noticed the buttons are the 1940s propeller style buttons, of which I have a few. I think they're wonderful buttons. And then there's ties at the cuffs. There's no collar as such, you know, it's all part rather than a lapel collar. And then she's got the beret on the top, and berets are worn as an accessory quite a lot through this drama, which really sets off the whole outfit. The pattern that I found that I think would be quite a good match for this coat is Lady Marlowe 196. It's got that very striking, almost military 1930s look. I think it's just absolutely wonderful. Underneath this coat, she has a dress which harkens back to a similar dress she wore in the Riviera. I noticed that Julian Day had mirrored that same neckline, and I haven't found a dress with that similar neckline. It's one that I would like to have a go at drafting myself. It's almost like a sailor collar, but comes out into like a floppy lapel at the front. But I found a dress, because in the Riviera she has a white with, I think it's either navy or little black print over it. And there's a tie on it, and then she wears more autumnal sort of floral print one when she's at Manderley. The pattern that I've chosen for this is My Vintage Wish, and it comes under the description of a flirty puff sleeve tea frock, which I think is a lovely description for the dress. Now, going along to one of the more iconic looks from the film is the grey trouser suit. So she wears that with a beautiful jacket, and you have to look at the detailing on the yoke. I just love how it's made in two pieces. So it's a simple single-breasted button front jacket with full leg trousers over a maroon turtleneck, and then she's got a black moss stitch, so it's a crocheted or knitted beret, and the look is heavily drawn from Marlene Dietrich. I mean, if you've seen the photos, you would have spotted it straight away. Day said he was inspired by the stylish trouser suit wearers of the day, such as Marlene Dietrich, Katharine Hepburn, Chanel and Greta Garbo, and he referred to various photos of the time. I've got two photos of Dietrich, one in the trouser suit she wore on her arrival to Paris in 1933, which caused a media stir. Rumoured that she was arrested on arrival for wearing a man's suit. French law was brought about in 1800 that stated any woman wishing to dress as a man must go to the police prefecture to obtain authorisation. Now, it was claimed that this law was enforced over Marlene Dietrich wearing the trouser suit, but that's not true. But it's good story, it's good press coverage, isn't it? This law was never enforced, even though it stayed in place till 2013. And they probably forgot it was even there as a law. And there's another photo of Dietrich in a beautiful, beautiful white trouser suit with a spotty tie on a lounger, on a liner. I think that was on her journey over to Paris. I just absolutely adore this. That's obviously going off and aside from what we're looking at with Rebecca. It's just, I love Marlene and how she dresses. Now, to recreate this suit, of which I have made these style trousers many times, and I've got them in white linen, I've made them in a blue herringbone, and before I show you the patterns, I'll just show you this lovely, it's a mulberry wool, and I'll just hold it up here. I've got this, I bought this in a fabric sale earlier this year, and it's not a herringbone, it's sort of more of a dotted sort of, so it's got cream and the mulberry, but I'm going to make myself some more of these trousers, and if there's enough left over, I'll make a little waistcoat to match. And I pulled out this vintage fabric that I'm planning to make an autumnal blouse, a long sleeve blouse, and it's this one here, and I think, try not to drop everything as I go, I think these two go rather beautifully together. So that's my plan, and then I'm thinking either a blue or a mulberry cardigan over the top of that. So those fabrics I've already got there as an aside. But the patterns that I've got to suggest to you for this, the trousers are the Wearing History home front overalls. That's what I make my side button trousers from. So ignoring the bib, just using the trousers, or using the two pairs of trousers that I showed you for recreating the Riviera look. And the jacket pattern that I found was Mrs. Depew 3052. It hasn't got that yoke. If you're good at pattern cutting, maybe you would work out how to recreate your own. It might be something that I'll be looking towards creating in the future myself, but at the moment it's just trying to give us all that inspiration and show you the things that are inspiring where my sewing is going to this autumn. We've all got to knit or crochet ourselves that little beret. Making a turtleneck from jersey would be quite a straightforward thing to do. There's so many patterns out there for very simple jersey turtleneck, but one that I have used a lot to make turtlenecks for my daughters is the Freya pattern from Tilly and the Buttons In. Now, throughout the film, the unnamed character wears quite a lot of marvellous blouses. I'll just show you one or two of them. I couldn't get really sharp images, so my apologies for that. There's a scene where she's wearing a blouse. It's like a stone coloured blouse. It's got an embroidered collar and she's wearing it with a marvellous blue wool skirt with 2 pleats up the front. And I found quite a similar pattern for this skirt. And you could use some of the other blouse patterns that I've referred to. I have got a blouse pattern for this to match this skirt also. I've gone again to my vintage Wish, and it's 8641, and I think that would be fabulous for recreating this skirt. Now, if you paired that skirt with the jacket that I showed you in her trouser suit, the Mrs. Depew 3052 jacket, you could perfectly recreate the gold skirt suit that she wears at the end of the film. Apparently it was original vintage Chanel boucle that he found in Paris, and he wanted to recreate the suit that would mirror the gold suit that Maxim wears at the beginning of the whole story, when he is the confident prize, you know, the strong man that she wants to win, and he's like an Oscar, a trophy, you know, with his broad shoulders in this big gold suit. By the end, he needs the unnamed narrator, his wife, to rescue him from being imprisoned or possibly hung. Potentially, he murdered Rebecca. I'm not giving any more with that. I keep giving some spoilers, don't I? But you may be familiar with the story if you're watching this. I'm sure you are, and I'm not spoiling it. But she wears a gold suit to mirror his at the beginning. So he's the strong, confident one, the prize she wants to win. And at the end, it's her that can save her husband. So she's now in the gold suit, showing she holds the power. So I think it's a really clever visual trick to show how that storyline develops. So as I said, you could use that skirt and the jacket to recreate that look too. The final pattern, and it's a free pattern for Ravelry, and it's a knitwear, and it's a jumper that appears a lot throughout the film, and it's the Victory jumper that was released in 1945 at the end of the war. It's June 1945 this pattern was brought out, and it's really hard. I have got it in some of my knitting books, like Susan Crawford's knitting book and another vintage knitting book. But this free pattern is on Ravelry from the V&A collection, so again I'll put a link for you, and it's the waves, and the pattern on the V&A is shown as quite big sort of wave pattern, but you could use a lace weight yarn in like a mohair, a fine, to recreate the look. That in here it's got subtle sort of dark, either navy or black, going through over lots of pale blues and lilacs and creams. It's echoing the grey rocks and the sea around Manderley and around in Cornwall. She goes out, she sees Jack Favell arrive, she puts on the jumper over that same little embroidered blouse with her trousers, and then she wears this amazing coat over the top. It's a really lovely free flowing coat, and the one that I've picked for that is Lady Marlowe 8136 to mirror that coat, and again the beret on the top. There are so many marvellous looks that we can recreate from this film. You may already have many patterns that would be useful to recreate these looks, obviously in colours that would suit your palette. And I like how throughout the film a lot of the clothes are mix and match. They're utilised again, you know, we see them in all sorts of different ways of wearing them. But there are so many clothes that I haven't touched on. I mean, it's an absolute feast for the eyes. If you haven't watched it already, I highly recommend it. I've watched it a few times, like the Hitchcock. And with the Hitchcock, obviously there's so many other fabulous clothes to look at and be inspired by. Last year in October on my Patreon, I focused on recreating the look from Rebecca, and it was looking about women wearing trousers. We were looking at the novel and the film, and I showed my patrons how to use a trouser pattern to recreate their own wide leg trousers with a side button enclosure. So if you go over to my Patreon, you will find in October last year how to draft these trousers, and there's also a bonus for my upper tier Trixie patrons on trouser fitting, you know, how to alter trouser patterns to fit you better. So there's a lot there. So if you want to subscribe to my Patreon, you can find that there. I'm also wearing rather a 30s inspired dress to mirror my version of her, the unnamed narrator's Riviera and then winter dress. It's got these caped sleeves that were very popular in the 30s, bow tie and darts that radiate off this keyhole, and it's my Betty bodice, which is also on my Patreon. So I dressed appropriately as I could for you for this chat. I hope you found this really useful, interesting. It's really useful for me to also put all my ideas together, because at the moment they were all in disparate sort of, I've got photocopies and photos on my phone and it's all over the place. So me collecting it together in this way has helped my head too. So thank you so much for joining me today. I love having you here with me. It's really good fun sharing my ideas with you as often as I can. I'm trying to do them weekly and get more up to date, you know, because it really inspires me as much as I hope it inspires you. So if you don't already subscribe, please do so you don't miss out on my content. Comment below, because I love having a chat with you and hearing what you've got to say. And all that remains for me now to do is to stop talking and say goodbye and let you get on with whatever sewing you've got to do, or knitting of course. So until I see you next time, bye bye for now, lovely ones.